Kansas already looking ahead to next year with the portal as they have some interest from an all Ivy League forward, and five-star KU commit Darryn Peterson goes for 58 points against AJ Dybantsa.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, as well as on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're going to be discussing Nana Owusu-Anane, who is a transfer forward from Brown out of the Ivy League, was an all Ivy League player. He is already in the portal for this year, and we'll get into why and all that sort of stuff. His scouting report, possible fit with KU, what it can tell us possibly about KU, what they'd be looking for in the portal to fill out the rest of the team for next year. Sounds like he's going to be visiting. We'll get into all that, and also Darryn Peterson, the five-star commit who is in the running for the best player in the recruiting class, I think ranked number 2 right now on 24/7 Sports, just dropped 58 points on the guy who's ranked number 1 in the class. Now, the guy who's number 1 also had a big game too, but we'll get into that on today's episode of the show, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers with FanDuel can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Do that with FanDuel. Let's get into the possible transfer portal news, even though we're in February here for KU basketball. So Joe Tipton at Tipton Edits on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, he tweeted this out the other day. He said, Brown University grad transfer Nana Owusu-Anane, who is a highly coveted forward in the portal, has narrowed down his list of schools to 8, according to his agent. Louisville, Grand Canyon, Kansas State, Arizona State, Kansas, Baylor, SMU, and San Diego State. Certainly interesting that there's 4 Big 12 schools on that list alone. But then he later tweeted, I think it was maybe a day later, maybe later that day, I can't remember. The same guy tweeted, Brown University grad transfer forward Nana Owusu-Anane has scheduled an official visit to Kansas. It sounds like that'll be this week for KU to have him. I don't know if he'll be at the Colorado game or if he'll just be visiting in general or how that all works. But he is a 6'8", 220-pound forward from Burlington in Ontario, Canada. He came into college at Brown University as a 3-star recruit. You know, obviously, I don't know how accurate you can get on the recruiting stuff when you have guys from out of the country, but still he has been productive for them. So as a freshman in 2021 to 2022 with Brown, he played 21 games, and then he missed the final 7 games that year with injury. He wound up averaging 5.7 points per game. He averaged 3.4 rebounds per game in 17 minutes that first year. Then year 2, 2022 to 2023, he became a team captain already as a sophomore. He went for 10.3 points, 8.2 rebounds, which the rebounds was second in the Ivy League. He also averaged 2.1 assists per game, 1.4 steals, and 1.2 blocks. He had 4 double-doubles, really filling up the stat sheet there. I was surprised he didn't end up all Ivy League that season with some of those stats that he put up. But then last year, he does end up an all Ivy League selection, second team all Ivy League pick as a junior when he averaged 14.7 points, 8.8 rebounds, 2.1 assists, 1.3 blocks, and 1.3 steals, and 1 block per game. He had 11 double-doubles last season, just really filled up the stat sheet. He did have one game against a power school, and that was USC. He had 13 points and 11 rebounds. And then in the 7 games they played against KenPom top 100 opponents, his effective field goal percentage was actually higher than what his regular effective field goal percentage was on the season. So you like to see that playing up to competition. Obviously, there's no guarantee how that moves over when that's all of your schedule, but that is a good thing to see. But to begin this season, and I don't know if this was something that he had at the end of last year that he had worked on, if it was an off-season injury or what, he had to get a surgery on his left shoulder. I think torn labrum is the official diagnosis, and has been out for all of this year. And so how it works with the Ivy League is players can't get that extra year. They don't get that 5th-year season, right? So you don't get a medical red shirt in the Ivy League. You just play your 4 years, and then you move on. So he, knowing that was going to be the case, that he was going to be missing this season for a medical red shirt, basically, and having surgery and stuff, already entered the transfer portal. So this isn't a Matthew Sluka, if you remember the UNLV quarterback, where it's like he left midseason. This was just, he knew that he wasn't going to be able to play this year, so he had to enter the transfer portal now to be like, hey, I can drum up more interest along the way of the season because I know I'm not going to be able to come back here for another year anyway. So he'll be a grad senior next season at his next stop. Now, the big question is, sometimes when you see these lists, sometimes when you see the portal interest, you have to diagnose, is that real? Is that not? And what I mean by that is sometimes you'll get kids like, I thoroughly remember, I bring this story up a lot, but like, a couple years ago, there was a kid, and I don't even remember his name anymore, but he listed like 2 or 3 schools as his finalists, and one of them was Kansas, and there was no offer from Kansas. He just put it on there and made the offer look like the decision of where he was going to choose look like a bigger deal. Sometimes that does happen. Other times, you can see, this, player is receiving interest from Kansas, and that can be varying degrees of what does that mean? That can be the degree of, they actually did offer. That can be the degree of they just called and were interested and wanted to hear more from the kid, or they were doing a favor to the agency because the agency is going to help them get a different recruit, right? There's a lot of different reasons it can go. It can even be something as simple as in between where it's like it's an offer, but it's dependent on if this guy leaves, or if this guy doesn't choose us, then, you would be our first choice after that happens, right? Like that sort of thing happens. So you don't really know where this stuff lies on the scale. I do think the fact, though, that he is going to be visiting Kansas should tell you that there is legit interest, that there is real interest from Kansas in bringing this kid along. And so when you look at it, I think the real question is, what is the role that he is looking for? Because that probably determines the ability for Kansas to bring him aboard, right? Because when you think about it, now, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen in the offseason. There are a lot of decisions like, would Zach Clements transfer? Would he come back? Would Flory Badunga go pro? Would he come back, right? I think recent play would probably indicate he's coming back. But regardless, with Bryson Tiller, right? Like, does Bill Self view him more as a 4? Does he view him more as a 5? Does he view him, right? Some of those things are going to be dependent on this. But from Owusu-Anane's perspective, do you want to go somewhere and be a starter? Because if you want to go somewhere and be a starter, your path to possibly being a starter, again, I'm under the impression that Flory is going to be back for year 2. That could change, and who knows. But if that is the assumption, and that is the thing that Bill Self is operating under, then you're viewing this from Kansas's perspective as he would either have to come in and start at the 4 next to Flory, or he would have to come in and operate and be an experienced backup big man that could still get a good amount of minutes and play a big role and make a good check of NIL. And, you'd have a degree from Brown, and then a graduate degree possibly from Kansas. Like talk about a nice duo of degrees that would set you up in life afterwards and all that sort of thing. And, obviously Canadian, like you can probably go play pro in Canada after it, right? There's still a lot of stuff you could do with that. But the question is for him, like, what does he want his role to be? It's going to take a certain guy. I did say on a previous episode, if you were an everydayer and caught the episode where we talked about next year's lineup, kind of talked about, like, I thought Kansas would be in the market for a backup big man. Even if you get Flory back, even if you get Clements back, even with Tiller, it made sense to go out and get, or it does make sense to go out and get an experienced backup. Somebody that, hey, if Flory has a game where he gets in foul trouble, you can trust somebody else to go out there. And even if Flory is, this dominant presence and this all Big 12 level player, how many minutes are you getting from Flory a night, right? You go back and look at David McCormick's minutes. You go back and look at like Udoka Azubuike's minutes. Like, I don't know, maybe Flory's playing 22, 25, 26 minutes per night next season, even if he's a star for Kansas. And so that leaves a good amount of minutes to be available. Plus, you have a kid like this who I think can play a little bit of the 4. I don't know how much you want that necessarily, but we've seen Kansas throw out 3 big lineups this year, right? We've seen Kansas throw out lineups, obviously, a lot over the past couple of years where KJ Adams is playing the 4, and Owusu-Anane can, he's not a super high volume shooter, but he at least can shoot it a little bit to where I think you can get away with that for a little bit. So point being, like, he could still get minutes if he comes in, but if he wants to be the star of the show, or he wants to be like in a position where he's has a better chance to start, might be the way to put it. Again, he could start at the 4. Then this might not be the role for him. But like I said, there's still a lot of reasons to come here. NIL, opportunities after school, chance to compete with the best, chance to try to win a national title, chance to play with Darryn Peterson, right, who we're going to talk about a little later on in the show. And who knows, maybe you do come in and you hit the ground running right away and you do start at the 4, and then you accomplish everything you want in an even bigger school. So I think there's a lot that goes into it. But as far as would I take him, would I not, let's get into a little bit more of an advanced scouting report and what this can tell us possibly about what Kansas is looking for in the portal on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You know, I love, especially once football season ends, getting in on the golf action as well, right? Which is at the Waste Management over the weekend. Now you're going to start to get in some of the big stuff. Obviously, the Masters will be right after the NCAA tournament, and you can do all that with FanDuel. Or you can go with college basketball. You can bet futures, right? If you're still believing that Kansas can make a Final Four, now's the time to do it because you're getting good odds over at FanDuel. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode. Thank you to you for listening. You can check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, advanced scouting report on what Owusu-Anane would bring to the table for KU. I found it interesting. On CBB Analytics, you can go and take a look at, like, they have player comps based on the statistic profile, right? It obviously isn't watching the video and stuff. It's just based on the stats. And if we go off of last year's stats, because he hasn't played this year, so it'd be compared to last year's players, and you can compare it to everybody in the country. You can compare it to specific conferences. I narrowed it down to just Big 12. I was like, okay, who in the Big 12 is this guy similar to? Based on last year's, there was some similarity. The most similar was that Victor Lakin guy, if you remember him from Cincinnati a season ago. He had a solid season for the Bearcats a season ago. The fourth most similar comp is actually Hunter Dickinson, which I found very interesting because I was like, okay, you have this 6'8", 220-pound forward. Hunter Dickinson's huge at 7'2". Like, I was like, I don't know. Like, when you watch the video of the games, they don't look that similar, but, like, I can see why there are some similarities in terms of, like, okay, they're both shooting around 2 threes per game. Like, I don't know. There are some similarities there, so I did find that kind of interesting. Now, as far as the strengths, and these are based on last year's stats. Again, he hasn't played this season. He was in the 83rd percentile in offensive rebound rate. So if you have a lineup with Owusu-Anane next to Flory Badunga for a certain amount of minutes, that's going to be, I mean, about as elite of an offensive rebounding, duo of KU bigs as we've seen in a long time under KU. I don't know, probably like a decade plus, right? Maybe you have to go back to, like, I don't know, Morris twins or I don't know, sometime back, which actually led to him being the 96th percentile in second chance points per game. So he's really good at cleaning stuff up. Then you look at it, he was solid in the paint, but away from the rim. So CBB Analytics separates. Some sites count, like, in the paint or at the rim as maybe 3 feet or 5 feet or the entirety of the paint. With CBB Analytics, they split it up. 4.5 feet to the rim is at the rim versus the rest of the shots in the paint. When it's outside the 4.5 feet, those are counted as in the paint. So he was good in that area. So, like, those 5 to 8 foot floaters or little push shots or mini mid-range shots. He also was really good from the mid-range. 53% field goal percentage in mid-range shooting. That was 92nd percentile on mid-range twos for his position. So you look at it and you say, okay, if you are going to play him at the 4 next to Flory at the 5, possibly, he can space it at the very least in the mid-range to a pretty reliable rate if you're basing it off his most recent season stats. The 3-point shooting is super interesting, 31% on 2 per game. That's not like a huge threat necessarily, but at least he can make them. And he has gotten better at them every year, right? Like, you look at the percentages, they've gone up every year. The volume has gone up every year. Maybe, I don't know, with another year in between, like, what if he gets that up to 2.5 attempts on 34% from 3, right? Like, that would mean a lot. And here's what I found interesting too. On the threes that were under 25 feet, so the threes where you're, like, actually, like, right at the line, he actually shot 34% from 3-point range on those shots in his last season. He just took too many where he was behind 25 feet, which you don't really want to do as a big man, but he did a little bit too much. So that gives me more hope that, like, yeah, maybe there is even a little bit more there than he's even shown in terms of the statistics. He was also 67th percentile, so, above average to good in free throw attempt rate. Obviously, Kansas could use a little bit more there. He was in the 88th percentile in fast break points per game. That's good. Kansas likes to get out in transition, though they've been struggling at it in Big 12 play this year. And then he was in the 89th percentile for assist percentage for centers. So if you're losing KJ Adams at the end of the year, you're obviously losing Hunter Dickinson at the end of the year. Both of those big men, something they do well is pass the ball. You would be bringing an element of that back with Owusu-Anane. So that would be a nice bonus for KU. Now, you look at the weaknesses. He is a 6'8" center, and if you go up in level, what does that necessarily mean? Now, again, would you play him more at the 4? Would he split minutes? Would that be okay? There are some teams around the Big 12 who have, 6'8". Like you look to West Virginia, like they're playing like, some 6'8" centers who are mobile. So maybe that would be okay. But where the height, I think, leads to a question here. He was in just the 32nd percentile in effective field goal percentage. And when you just look at 2-point percentage, he was in the 34th percentile. So he was below average at shooting 2-point shots. He took a lot of shots at the rim, but he only shot 57% at the rim his last season of play. That was only in the 21st percentile for his position. So this has not been a guy who has finished at a high rate at the rim. And I think the size is a part of it. And that is a real question that going up against bigger, more athletic competition, is that going to get dwarfed even more? And if that is the case, I don't know that you can really play him at the 5, right? Maybe you can get away with 5-10 minutes here, but you can't really rely on him on the offensive end consistently unless you're doing like pick and pops. So some of the on-off defensive numbers also are not great. So I don't know how good of a defender he is, but also I'm not entirely sure how much of that was compared to the rest of the team. They play a lot of like smaller guards. So maybe that was just he was on the court a lot with some other players who weren't good defenders. Because you look at he was 58th percentile in block rate, so above average. He was 88th percentile for steal rate at his position, so really good at getting steals for a big man. And you look at Hakeem percentage, which is a combination of steal rate and block rate, 68th percentile. So some of the chaos stats he was good at, which doesn't mean you're a good defender, but like sometimes it does. And I don't know. I guess I would be going into the season like not expecting him to be a great defender, but I don't think I would expect him to be a bad defender either. The other big question here is he's coming off a season-ending injury, right? What does he look like coming off of that? How does that affect his shooting form with the shoulder? I don't know which shoulder it is. And then, this obviously the second injury he's had. He missed the end of the season, his freshman season too. Like, is that a problem you have to deal with? And, if you would be looking at him and Elmarco Jackson as both being guys coming into the rotation, let's say you have an 8-man rotation, that means basically 25% of your rotation, you're counting on guys coming off of season-ending injuries. What does that necessarily mean? So I think those are all valid questions. Now, as far as this a take or no take, I do think this is a take, but I think it's a take dependent on how you view it. If Bill Self views this as, hey, we're expecting this guy to come in and be our starting 4 next to Flory, I don't necessarily love that because I would have questions about, is he going to be mobile enough on the defensive end? And then if you're playing him at the 5, I would have questions about, is he going to finish enough at the rim? But if you're bringing him in to be a older player that can help along, second-year players in that point at Bryson Tiller and Flory Bidunga, that he can be a reliable guy to come in if either of those get in foul trouble, that he can compete with Bryson Tiller, and maybe he ends up in front of Bryson Tiller, because I think Tiller, in the same way that I would view Nana Owusu-Anane, I would view both of them as being guys that can play the 4 or can play the 5. So it gives you more versatility and it gives you more competition for both those guys to be like, okay, whoever's better, they're going to play, right? And I think it gives you that, I don't know, experience and probably a smart kid, right? He was at Brown, that can't hurt to have in the locker room. And in a way that, like, I know Tarek Black actually ended up starting a lot of games for KU, but like, I think it would make a lot of sense to bring on, you have that kind of experience big that helps you get through the season. And, best case scenario is playing 20 minutes a night, right? He's getting 8 minutes per game at the 4, and he's getting 12 minutes per game as the backup 5. I think there's a real role that you can use this kid for that would be beneficial for the team. So from that perspective, it's a take. But if you're viewing this as, hey, we expect this kid to come in and play 25 minutes a night and start, then like, I don't necessarily know that I love that. And as far as what this could tell us about the offseason, I think going back to the idea, it makes sense for KU to bring in an experienced backup big who can play a little bit for them and be insurance for Flory Bidunga and Bryson Tiller in case, one of them is not ready for that leap, or in the case of foul trouble for a young big man or whatever it ends up being. Plus, you just want to, establish some more big man depth. And obviously a question would be, well, can you just get that from a guy you already have in the roster, right? Like with Zach Clements. And it's like, well, I think we've seen enough there that like, I'd be comfortable going out and getting this kid and, seeing what it ends up being. So the big question for me becomes, would this be a situation where Bill Self is saying, no, we are going to bring this in because we are going to play predominant 2-big basketball. We're going to play Flory at the 5, Bryson Tiller and Nana Owusu-Anane are going to be at the 4 and the 5. And a majority of our minutes are going to be 2-big basketball. And if that's the case, I don't know that I love that either. I want more of a true wing at the 4. And if you're playing 2-big basketball for 10 minutes a night, 15 minutes, sure. But I want the predominant lineup to be with a wing at the 4. So again, if that's the case too, I don't necessarily love that, but I do like the player overall, even though there are some questions I have in terms of what the specific role could be asked of him. I think that could be a good thing for KU. Let's finish up. Darryn Peterson just went off. Could he be a future teammate of Nana Owusu-Anane? We'll discuss that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. All right, well, we will have a Colorado preview on tomorrow's episode, so make sure you're locked in with Locked On Jayhawks here. So Darryn Peterson, who is the 5-star recruit on 24/7 Sports, he's listed as the number 2 player in the class of 2026. He just played against AJ Dybantsa. Dybantsa is the number 1 recruit in the class. He is committed to BYU. They played earlier in the season, and both of them had good games too. I think Peterson had like 32, Dybantsa had like 28 in that matchup. Well, this go around, they both went off as well. Dybantsa had like 49, but Peterson had 58 freaking points. And he hits the game-winning 3 as well. It's an awesome play. He gets to the corner, and he kind of pump fakes. Guy blows by, and then he hits the 3. They win by 2 points, and he ends up with those 58 points. Also had like 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals. Shot it well from kind of all over the floor, as you can imagine, in scoring 58 points. This kid is just a complete package, man. I mean, and watching him play and the aggressiveness he plays with, like I don't think he has the same athletic bounce as Andrew Wiggins. I mean, he's still a good athlete, right? Like you don't become a top 5 recruit in the country by, not being a good athlete. He's still a good athlete. But Andrew Wiggins was like 99th percentile athlete, right? I don't know what Darryn Peterson would be. He's still a good athlete. But Peterson is just so much more polished, man. His ability to score at all the different levels, like that is so much better than a guy like Josh Jackson. It's unbelievable watching him. And I'm kind of a little bit scared because like I am buying into the hype so much here that like I'm buying into the hype of like not just, hey, this kid's going to come in and be a good freshman, right? I'm like starting to buy into the hype that like he's going to come in and be a first team All-American right away. That he's going to be like the same way that Cooper Flagg has come in for Duke this year. And he's one of the 2 favorites. It's like him or Janai Broome for Auburn, who are going to win National Player of the Year. Like that is to the point of where I am getting with this kid, with Darryn Peterson. And that scares me because we see it all the time where freshmen come in and it takes a year to adjust or something like that. But like, he just keeps doing it on this stage, man. And I think there's a real question about how do you build the roster around him? Do you use him more as the lead guard? Do you use him more as a 2-man that can also initiate the offense and, bring it up in certain situations, but you need that other guard? And then what do you do about that other guard? I think that's really the big question for me, right? It's not just, who do you put at the 4? I'd prefer more of a shooter type, right? What do you do around him? But it's also, what do you do at the other guard position, right? Whether it's a 2 or whether it's a 1 or whether it's a combo where you view both of them as kind of combo guards that can lead and shoot and everything. Do you go for more of a scoring guard that can take pressure off of Darryn Peterson, that now you have this dynamic duo of a backcourt that, if you double team one guy or if you put your best defender on one guy, then the other guy can go off? Or do you go with more of a like pass first defensive point guard, like a DeJuan Harris type, right? Somebody who can take the top defensive assignment on the other end, to where Darryn Peterson doesn't have to exert as much energy on that end, and he can just be a pass first guy, so you allow Peterson to have the ball in his hands even more? Or do you view it as more of a like ball mover, not dominant ball, but like he'll move the ball but hit threes? Or do you go for the guy who is more of like a Max Asmus type, right? Where he's just this like creating scoring point guard. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what KU does. In my head, I would lean toward having that scoring point guard to where you could have 2 dynamic threats that can get you buckets at all time. And like, if it's not one guy's night, it can be the other guy's night. And I think that would be a really fun backcourt to watch if you can find that guy in the portal. I mean, who knows who that would end up being necessarily. That would be my lean. But like, I would understand if you did say, hey, let's go with that defensive point guard who can, just get the ball to him on the offensive end of the court. But that would also, I think, be reliant. If you do that, you have to go for a wing who can shoot threes at the 4, and you need somebody at the 3, like a Ryland Griffin, to come back and shoot threes, right? Because you have to have at least 2 knockdown shooters, I think, around Darryn Peterson to open things up. You don't want a situation where it's you have a defensive first point guard, you're playing another big at the 4, and now your only real big shooter around Darryn Peterson is your 3, to where now teams can basically sag off your 4 and double team Darryn Peterson, and they only have to worry about 1 3-point shooter. So it kind of depends, like they're linked. The 1 and the 4 are linked. You need one of those 2, I think, to be a knockdown shooter in some way, or be like a real scorer in some way. And so going back to the conversation about Nana Owusu-Anane, if he's a backup big, that's a different conversation. But if you're viewing him as being real competition and viewing it as, hey, one of Owusu-Anane or Tiller is going to start at the 4, then I think you do have to go for a scoring point guard to fill in next to Peterson. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back at you on Tuesday for a little KU Colorado preview. See you then.